The Yellowstone Volcano Old Faithful's geysers geological heart revealed. Dense seismograph array shows subsurface plumbing. This is by University of Utah. The scientists have mapped the near-surface geology around Old Faithful. It erupts every 90 minutes or so daily, revealing the reservoir of heated water that feeds the geyser surface vent and how the ground shaking behaves in between eruptions. So there's also, of course, tremors there. Old Faithful in Yellowstone National Park. It's one of the 21 supervolcanoes of the world, if not more. Most famous landmark is the geyser. Millions of visitors come to the park every year to see the geyser erupting every 44 to 125 minutes. That's an average of 90 minutes. And we know that Yellowstone has 60% of the world's geysers and over 10,000 hydrothermal areas. But despite Old Faithful's fame, relatively little is known about the geological anatomy of this structure and the fluid pathways that fuel the geyser below the surface up to now. University of Utah scientists mapped the near-surface geology around Old Faithful, revealing the reservoir of heated water that feeds the geyser surface vent and how the ground shaking behaves in between the eruption. Now, the map was made possible by a dense network of portable seismographs and by new seismic analysis techniques. The results, published in Geophysical Research Letters, doctoral student Xin Mei Wu is the first author. For Robert Smith, a longtime Yellowstone researcher and distinguished research professor of geology and geophysics, the study is the culmination of more than a decade of planning and comes as he celebrates his 60th year working in America's first national park. Smith says, "Here's the iconic geyser of Yellowstone. It's known around the world, but the complete geologic plumbing of Yellowstone's upper geyser basin, where, of course, Old Faithful is found, has not been mapped, nor have we studied how the timing of eruptions is related to precursor ground tremors before the eruptions." So there are ground tremors before the eruption, and how is that related? That's what they have to find out. Finally, support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box. So they want to find out why there are eruptions related to the precursor ground tremors before eruptions. Small seismometers. Old Faithful is an iconic example of hydrothermal feature and particularly of the features of Yellowstone National Park, which is underlain by 2 active magma reservoirs at depths of 5 to 40 kilometers depth that provide heat. That's about anywhere from 3 miles down and deeper, and that provide heat to the overlying near-surface groundwater. In some places within Yellowstone, the hot water manifests itself in pools and springs, and in others it takes the forms of explosive geysers. Dozens of structures surround Old Faithful, including hotels, a gift shop, a visitor center. Some of these buildings, the Park Service has found, are built over thermal features that result in excessive heat beneath the built environment. And we know that Hebgen Lake, which had a 7.5 magnitude earthquake back in August of 1959, there are hotels and motels around the whole lake. People go there for their vacations, and they go trout fishing there as well. Even though a lot of these, the water from these geysers fills up rivers and streams that end up in Hebgen Lake, and they're filled with silica and also mercury. So these fish are full of mercury from the water, the minerals in the water, and obviously you shouldn't be eating those fish. But anyway, that's just from a very older past article that we read concerning the minerals and such as mercury in the water from the geysers. So all these hotels and visitor amenities in the park are found over, of course, these areas. Some of the buildings the Park Services found are built over the thermal areas where there is excessive heat underneath the built environment. As part of their plan to manage the Old Faithful area, the Park Service asked University of Utah scientists to conduct a geological survey of the area around the geyser of Old Faithful. For years, the study co-author Jamie Farrell and Fan Chi Lin, along with Smith, have worked to characterize the magma reservoirs deep beneath Yellowstone. Although geologists can use seismic data from large earthquakes to see features deep in the earth, the shallow subsurface geology of the park has remained a mystery because mapping it out would require capturing everyday miniature ground movements and seismic energy on a much smaller scale. Lin says, "We try to use continuous ground shaking produced by humans, cars, wind, water, and Yellowstone's hydrothermal boiling and convert it into our signal. We can extract a useful signal from the ambient background ground vibration," he said. To date, the University of Utah has placed 30 permanent seismometers around the park to record ground shaking and monitor for earthquakes and volcanic events. The cost of these seismometers, however, can easily exceed $10,000 each. Small seismometers developed by Fairfield Nodal for the oil and gas industry reduce the cost to less than $2,000 per unit. They're small white canisters, about 6 inches high, and are totally autonomous and self-contained. You just take it out and stick it in the ground, Smith says. In 2015, with the new instruments, the Utah team deployed 133 seismometers in the Old Faithful and Geyser Hill areas for a 2-week campaign. The sensors picked up bursts of intense seismic tremors around Old Faithful, about 60 minutes long, separated by about 30 minutes of quiet. Then Farrell presents these patterns. He often asks audiences at what point they think the eruption of Old Faithful takes place. Surprisingly, it's not at the peak of shaking. It's at the end, just before everything goes quiet again. After an eruption, the geyser's reservoir fills again with hot water. Farrell explains that that's as the cavity fills up, you have a lot of hot pressurized bubbles, he says, and when they come up, they cool off rapidly and they collapse and implode. The energy released by those implosions causes the tremors leading up to the eruption of the geyser. One scientist's noise is another scientist's signal. Typically, researchers create a seismic signal by swinging a hammer onto a metal plate on the ground. Lin and Wu developed the computational tools that would help find useful signals among the seismic noise without disturbing the sensitive environment in the Upper Geyser Basin. Wu says she was able to use the hydrothermal feature themselves as a seismic source to study how seismic energy propagates by correlating signals recorded in the sensor close to the persistent source to other sensors. It's amazing that you can use a hydrothermal source to observe this structure here, she says. And when analyzing data from the seismic sensors, the researchers noticed that tremor signals from Old Faithful were not reaching the western boardwalk. Seismic waves extracted from another hydrothermal feature in the north slowed down and scattered significantly in nearly the same area, suggesting somewhere west of Old Faithful was an underground feature that affects the seismic waves in an anomalous way. With a dense network of seismometers, the team could determine the shape, size, and location of the feature, which they believe is Old Faithful's hydrothermal reservoir. Wu estimates that the reservoir, a network of cracks and fractures through which water flows, has a diameter of about 200 meters, that's 600 feet, a little larger than the University of Utah's Rice-Eccles Stadium, and can hold approximately 300,000 cubic meters of water, or more than 79 million gallons. By comparison, each eruption of Old Faithful releases about 30 cubic meters of water, or nearly 8,000 gallons. Although it's a rough estimate, we were surprised that it was so large, Wu says. Further work, the team is far from done answering questions about Yellowstone. They returned for another seismic survey back in November 2016 and planned more, of course, of these surveys, beginning after the park roads closed for the winter. Wu is looking at how air temperature might change the subsurface structure and affect the propagation of seismic waves. Air temperature, yes. Farrell is using the team's seismic data to predict how earthquake waves might reverberate through the region, as Smith is looking forward to conducting similar analysis in Norris Geyser Basin, the hottest geothermal area of the park. Lynn says that the University of Utah's research program in Yellowstone owes much to Smith's decade-long relationship with the park, enabling new discoveries. Lynn says you need new techniques, but also those long-term relationships. This was by Sin Mei Wu, Kevin Ward, J.B. Farrell, Fan Chi Lin, Marianne Karplus, Robert Smith, by the University of Utah on Science Daily. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support.